The holographic display cast an ethereal blue glow across Ambassador Elena Santos's face as she studied the latest reports from Earth's outer colonies. The Galactic Assembly's grand chamber, with its soaring crystal spires and ancient murals, felt particularly cold today. 20 years of human expansion into the stars had brought prosperity, but also growing resentment from the Assembly's founding species. Elena had earned her position through decades of diplomatic work, becoming humanity's first female representative to the Assembly. She understood the delicate balance required when dealing with civilizations that measured their histories in millennia rather than centuries. The Arcturians, with their crystalline bodies and collective consciousness, saw humans as barely more than clever animals. The Vorax, masters of biological engineering, watched humanity's rapid technological advancement with mounting concern. And the Meridians, the Assembly's eldest members, had begun openly questioning whether allowing Earth into the galactic community had been a mistake. Ambassador Santos. A melodic voice chimed. Elena turned to face Counselor Xareth, the Meridian's chief representative. His iridescent scales shifted colors as he moved, a sign of agitation that Elena had learned to recognize. The Assembly has concerns about your people's latest colonial expansion. The Proxima sector was designated as a cultural preservation zone. Elena maintained her diplomatic composure, though her heart raced. The Proxima sector had been legally opened for settlement through proper channels. She personally overseen the paperwork. Counselor, I have the authorization right here, signed and approved by the Assembly's own Colonial Affairs Committee. Yes, Xareth's scales flickered to a deep purple. An oversight that will be corrected. The threat wasn't subtle. Elena had spent enough time in these halls to recognize when the Assembly's elder species had already made their decision. Humanity's rapid expansion, their ability to adapt and improve upon alien technologies, their growing influence, it had all become too much for the established order. The Assembly cannot simply revoke legal settlements. Elena stood her ground. There are over 50,000 human colonists in Proxima now. Families, children, they've built lives there. Lives that should never have begun. A new voice rasped. Vorkath, the Vorax representative, his bioengineered form towering over the human ambassador. Your species spreads like a virus, consuming resources, copying our achievements, polluting established hierarchies with your democracy. He spat the last word like a curse. Elena felt the shift in the chamber's atmosphere. Other representatives were gathering now, their collective attention focused on this confrontation. She'd faced hostile negotiations before, but something felt different. Dangerous. If the Assembly has concerns, let's address them properly. Elena kept her voice steady. Earth is willing to discuss reasonable limitations on colonial expansion, technology sharing agreements. The time for discussion is over. Xareth interrupted. His scales had turned black, a color Elena had never seen before. The Assembly has reached its decision. Humanity requires correction. The first energy blast caught Elena in the shoulder, spinning her around. The second struck her square in the chest. As she fell, she saw the other representatives watching impassively. Not a single one moved to help. Her final act was to activate her neural transmitter, broadcasting everything back to Earth. The Assembly needed to understand. Humanity would not forget this. The news reached Earth within hours. In the United Earth Defense Command Center, Fleet Admiral David Chen watched the recording in silence. The Assembly had made their position clear. Humanity's rise would not be tolerated. As emergency meetings were called and military alerts blared across human space, Chen thought about the message they'd send in return. Humanity had not come this far to be corrected. They had not reached the stars to bow before ancient empires. The Assembly had made a crucial error. They had assumed humanity's diplomatic restraint was weakness. They would learn otherwise. As the recording ended, Chen gave the order that would echo across human space. All fleets to battle stations. This is not a drill. The breaking point had been reached, and humanity would show the galaxy exactly what that meant. Fleet Admiral David Chen stood before the United Earth Defense Council, his weathered face illuminated by the tactical displays showing humanity's military assets across known space. The room was silent save for the soft hum of holographic projectors. Every person present had watched Ambassador Santos's final transmission a dozen times. Now, they awaited Chen's assessment. The Assembly believes they sent us a message. Chen's voice carried across the chamber. They think they've demonstrated their superiority. What they've actually done is show us their fear. He gestured to the tactical display, highlighting human colony worlds in green. We've expanded faster than they predicted, adapted their technologies more quickly than they imagined possible. They're not acting from strength. They're acting from panic. The council members exchanged glances. They'd all seen the intelligence reports. Despite their advanced age, the assembly species had grown complacent. Their technological progress had plateaued centuries ago. Humanity's rapid advancement threatened their carefully maintained power structure. What are our options? Council Chairman Rivera asked, though everyone knew there was only one real choice. Chen's response was measured but firm. The Assembly's actions constitute an act of war. They murdered our ambassador while broadcasting their contempt for our entire species. If we don't respond with overwhelming force, they'll see it as confirmation of their superiority. They'll begin systematically dismantling everything we've built. He activated a new tactical overlay, showing military deployment patterns. I've already initiated Protocol Thunderbolt. Our newer ships, the ones we built using our own innovations rather than copied assembly designs, are moving into position. The Assembly doesn't know about them yet. They think they know our capabilities. They're wrong. The advances had been kept secret for precisely this scenario. While openly copying assembly technology, humanity's engineers had been pushing boundaries in new directions. Quantum phase drives that could slit between traditional detection grids, adaptive shield systems that learned from enemy weapon patterns, and most importantly, that any XUS combat AI network that could coordinate fleet actions with unprecedented precision. The assembly species fight alone. Chen continued. Each race maintains their own military, their own command structure. They're united in their disdain for younger species, but divided in everything else. A slight smile crossed his face. We're going to use that against them. The tactical display shifted again, showing primary assembly worlds in red. Our first strike will target their communication nodes. The Meridians, the Vorax, and the Arcturians all rely on different faster-than-light communication methods. We'll hit all three simultaneously. Before they can coordinate a response, we'll launch attacks on their primary shipyards. They outnumber us significantly, a council member pointed out. In traditional ships, yes, Chen acknowledged. But numbers mean nothing if you can't coordinate them effectively. We'll be fighting with a unified strategy against fragmented opponents, and unlike them, we've been preparing for this possibility. The council chamber erupted in discussion, but Chen's attention was drawn to a private message on his neural link. Captain Sarah Martinez, commanding the stealth carrier Perseus, was reporting in from the edge of assembly space. Her ship and its accompanying ghost fleet were in position. Humanity's first strike force, ready to demonstrate just how much the Assembly had underestimated them. The Assembly believes this is a moment of correction. Chen addressed the Council again. They're right, but not in the way they think. This is humanity's chance to correct their assumptions about us. They think we're an upstart species that needs to be put in our place. We're going to show them exactly what humanity does when backed into a corner. The Council's vote was unanimous. Within hours, the declaration of war was broadcast across human space. But unlike the Assembly's arrogant display of power, humanity's message was brief and to the point. The United Earth Defense Command formally declares a state of war against all Assembly powers. There will be no further diplomatic communications. Our actions will speak for us. As the message went out, Chen sent the activation code to Captain Martinez. The Perseus and its fleet of next-generation warships disengaged their quantum phase drives, appearing like ghosts in the heart of assembly space. The Meridian's primary communication hub hung before them, its operators unaware that humanity's response was about to begin. All ships, weapons free. Martinez's command echoed across the quantum-encrypted channels. Show them what humanity's really capable of. The assembly had thought they were dealing with an infant species that would cower before their power. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous. Humanity united in righteous fury. Armed with technologies the assembly didn't know existed, and driven by an unshakable determination to prove their place among the stars. Real war was about to begin, and nothing in the assembly's millennia of existence had prepared them for what was coming. Captain Sarah Martinez watched through the Perseus's quantum blast U-port as another Meridian warship dissolved under concentrated fire from her ghost fleet. The assembly's response to humanity's first strikes had been predictably rigid. Massive fleets moving in traditional formation, following combat doctrines that hadn't changed in centuries. They were fighting the last war while humanity was inventing the next one. Status report on the NEXUS analysis, she asked her AI integration officer, Lieutenant Patel. NEXUS has identified 3 major patterns in Meridian shield modulation. Patel responded, his fingers dancing across holographic controls. Their adaptive algorithms are, well, they're not very adaptive. Each time we hit them with a new weapon configuration, they take an average of 47 seconds to adjust. Martinez smiled. Those 47 seconds were an eternity in modern combat. The NEXUS system was already distributing updated firing solutions to every ship in the fleet, ensuring that each volley exploited the Meridian's lag time and shield adaptation. It was exactly the kind of advantage Admiral Chen had been counting on. But the Meridians weren't their only concern. Reports were flooding in from across assembly space as humanity's surprise offensive continued. The Vorax had responded with massive biological weapons, living ships that could regenerate damage. The Arcturians had deployed their crystalline fortress worlds, ancient defensive platforms that could redirect energy attacks back at their source. New tactical data incoming from Proxima Sector, Patel announced. The Vorax are adapting faster than anticipated. Their bioships are developing immunities to our standard weapons within minutes of exposure. This was the real test of humanity's preparation. The assembly species had assumed that copying their technology was the limit of human innovation. They hadn't understood that humans had been studying their weaknesses just as carefully as their strengths. Deploy the Phase 2 countermeasures, Martinez ordered. Across her fleet, specialized pods detached from the ghost ships. The Vorax had engineered their ships to adapt to energy weapons and conventional explosives. They hadn't considered that humans might attack them with engineered viruses, specifically designed to target their bioorganic hull matrices. The effect was immediate. The massive Vorax vessels began to calcify, their regenerative abilities turned against them by human-engineered biological agents. It wasn't just about having better weapons, it was about understanding how to turn an enemy's strengths into weaknesses. Meanwhile, in the Arcturian theater, humanity's ground forces were demonstrating their own forms of adaptation. The crystalline beings had assumed their fortress worlds were impregnable, their energy-redirecting defenses unbeatable. They hadn't counted on humans developing dark tech, weapons and armor that absorbed energy rather than reflecting it, rendering the Arcturians' primary defense meaningless. Commander Jack Torres led one such ground assault, his stealth platoon moving through the crystalline corridors of an Arcturian stronghold. Their dark tech armor made them nearly invisible to Arcturian sensors, which relied on energy reflection for detection. Remember, Torres subvocalized to his team through their neural links. They think in consensus. They can't understand unpredictable individual action. Use that. The human soldiers moved like shadows, each following their own initiative while coordinating through NEXUS. The Arcturians, used to fighting enemies that attacked in organized formations, found themselves unable to establish effective defense patterns against opponents who never did the same thing twice. Back in space, Martinez was receiving updates from across the front. The Assembly's forces were substantial, but they were fighting with outdated assumptions. They deployed their fleets in grand, predictable patterns, expecting to overwhelm with superior numbers. Instead, human forces struck from unexpected vectors, used weapons that shouldn't exist, and employed tactics that defied conventional military doctrine. Captain Patel's voice carried a note of excitement. NEXUS has completed its analysis of Meridian FTL communications. We can now predict their relay patterns with 93% accuracy. This was another crucial advantage. The Assembly species, despite their advanced technology, had never fully integrated their systems. Each race maintained their own communication networks, their own command structures. Humanity's NEXUS network, by contrast, allowed for instant coordination across all human forces. "Send word to Admiral Chen," Martinez ordered. Phase 1 objectives are nearly complete. The Assembly's forces are fragmented, their primary communication hubs are down, and their standard combat protocols are proving ineffective against our adaptive strategies. The response came back almost instantly through the quantum-encrypted channels. "Excellent work, Captain. Prepare for Phase 3 deployment. It's time to show them what happens when humanity stops playing defense." Martinez looked out at the battlefield, where Meridian ships still struggled to adapt to attacks they barely understood. The Assembly had thought humanity's greatest strength was its ability to copy their technology. They were learning, far too late, that humanity's real power lay in its ability to innovate, to adapt, and to turn established wisdom on its head. The next phase would demonstrate this even more clearly. The Assembly was about to learn that everything they'd seen so far was just humanity warming up. Admiral Chen studied the unusual transmission with growing interest. The message had come through channels that shouldn't exist, encrypted with methods that bore no resemblance to Assembly protocols. Its source, the shadowed worlds, systems that had been deliberately hidden from Assembly records for millennia. They call themselves the Forgotten. His intelligence chief, Dr. Maya Wang, explained, species that were pushed to the margins of the galaxy by Assembly expansion. Some were early spacefaring races that refused to submit to Assembly authority. Others were developing civilizations that showed too much promise, too much potential to challenge the established order. The holographic display showed dozens of systems, carefully concealed through advanced cloaking technology. Within them, entire civilizations had continued to develop away from Assembly oversight. They had watched humanity's rise with keen interest, and now they were reaching out. The Nix, Dr. Wang highlighted one species profile, were master stealth technologists before the Assembly forced them into hiding. The Forge Minds, another profile appeared, were achieving artificial intelligence synthesis when the Assembly declared such research forbidden. The Quantum Weavers, the Star Swimmers, the Deep Dreamers, each pushed aside because they developed along paths the Assembly couldn't control. Chen understood the implications immediately. "They've been watching us, waiting to see if we'd submit to Assembly correction or fight back." "Yes," Wang nodded, "and our response has exceeded their expectations. The Assembly's grip on power has always relied on the illusion of inevitability. The belief that resistance is pointless against species with such advanced technology and ancient authority. We've shattered that illusion. The timing couldn't have been better. While humanity's initial strikes had been devastatingly effective, the sheer size of Assembly space meant that a war of attrition would eventually favor the older species. But with allies who knew Assembly space intimately, who had developed technologies along completely different paths, the strategic calculation changed dramatically. On the front lines, Captain Martinez was the first to witness this change. The Perseus's sensors detected unusual energy signatures approaching her fleet's position. Ships using propulsion systems unlike anything in human or Assembly databases. For a moment, she thought they were facing a new Assembly weapon. Then the communication came, encoded in a way that bypassed standard Assembly monitoring. "Children of Earth, we have watched your defiance with great interest. The Nix stand ready to aid your cause. The ships that decloaked around the Perseus were unlike anything Martinez had seen. Where human vessels were sleek and metallic, these were shadow stuff given form, barely visible even when revealed. Their weapon systems interfaced with space-time in ways that human science was only beginning to theorize about. Unwittingly, analyze and integrate, Martinez ordered, and watched in fascination as the AI network began learning from their new allies' capabilities. The Nyx vessels moved like quantum ghosts through assembly defensive lines, creating gaps that human ships could exploit. It was a devastating combination. Humanity's innovative combat tactics merged with technology that operated on fundamentally different principles than anything the assembly had encountered. Similar scenes played out across the front. The Forge mines provided human forces with AI integration capabilities that made Unwittingly even more effective. The Quantum Weavers showed them how to create temporary wormholes for tactical advantage. Each alliance brought new capabilities, new ways of approaching problems that the Assembly's rigid thinking had never considered. But perhaps most importantly, these allies brought knowledge. Centuries of observation had given them intimate understanding of Assembly weaknesses, predetermined responses, and blind spots. The Assembly had grown complacent in their power, never imagining that their cast-offs and rejects might someday return. "They fear you," the Nyx commander explained to Martinez during a strategic conference. "Not just your weapons or your tactics, but your potential. You achieved in decades what many species take centuries to develop. You look at their technology not with awe, but with a desire to improve it. This is why they tried to break you early. Because they recognized in humanity the same spark they tried to extinguish in all of us." The Assembly's response to these new developments was predictably rigid. They increased the size of their fleets, tried to overwhelm their opponents with pure force, never adapting their fundamental approach. They couldn't understand how species they had dismissed as inferior could now challenge their power. Admiral Chen knew this was their opportunity. The Assembly's forces were stretched thin, trying to maintain their grip on power across too many fronts. Their communication networks, already damaged by human strikes, were now being systematically dismantled by Nyx infiltrators. Their command and control systems were being overwhelmed by Forge Mine cyber attacks. The Assembly made one fundamental mistake. Chen told the United Earth Defense Council. They assumed that pushing other species aside would ensure their dominance. Instead, they created a network of allies waiting for the right moment to strike back. "We're not just fighting for humanity anymore. We're fighting for every species that's ever been told they don't deserve a place among the stars." The war was entering a new phase. The Assembly's grip on power was crumbling, their certainty shaken, their authority questioned openly for the first time in millennia. They had tried to make an example of humanity. Instead, they had created a catalyst for their own downfall. The final battle was approaching, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Assembly's Grand Chamber, where Ambassador Santos had died, now looked very different. The crystalline spires were cracked, the ancient murals scared by weapons fire. Admiral Chen stood where she had fallen, surrounded by representatives not just from Earth, but from dozens of formerly hidden species. Before them, the remaining Assembly leaders waited in chains. The war's final battle had been decisive. The combined forces of humanity and their newfound allies had struck at the Assembly's core worlds simultaneously. Human tactical innovation, Nyx stealth technology, forge-mined AI systems, and quantum weaver space-time manipulation had proved an unstoppable combination against the Assembly's rigid defensive doctrine. "You still don't understand, do you?" Chen addressed the imprisoned Assembly leaders. "You could have had allies instead of subjects, partners instead of enemies. Every species you pushed aside, every civilization you tried to suppress, could have contributed to something greater." Gazareth, the Meridian who had given the order to kill Santos, looked up with scales now permanently black. "We maintained order for millennia. We preserved stability. You preserved stagnation," corrected the Nyx shadow speaker, their form rippling like dark water. You feared change so much that you tried to freeze the galaxy in amber. Captain Martinez, standing at Chen's side, activated a holographic display showing the combined fleet that had won the war. Human ships flew in formation with vessels that bent light itself, alongside massive AI constructs and ships that phased between dimensions. It was a display of diversity in approach and technology that the Assembly had never imagined possible. The galaxy doesn't belong to any one species or system of thought, Martins declared. Its future can't be controlled or contained. It has to be free to evolve. The next few hours were spent laying the groundwork for that future. The Assembly's rigid hierarchy was formally dissolved. In its place, a new galactic conclave would be established, one where all spacefaring species would have equal voice, where technological and cultural exchange would be encouraged rather than suppressed. Dr. Wong presented evidence of countless other species the Assembly had pushed into hiding or deemed unworthy of space travel. Teams were already being assembled to make contact, to invite them into the new galactic community. The Assembly's carefully maintained order was being replaced by something more chaotic, but infinitely more vital. There will be challenges, Chen acknowledged to the gathered representatives. Different species will develop in different ways, follow different paths. There will be conflicts to resolve, differences to navigate. But that's how growth happens, not through enforced stability, but through the dynamic interaction of diverse approaches and ideas. The Forge Mind Collective hummed in agreement, their AI matrices already helping to design systems for facilitating communication and cooperation between wildly different species. The Quantum Weavers were proposing new transportation networks that would make the galaxy more accessible to emerging civilizations. The Nix offered to teach their stealth technology to species that wanted to explore without interference. Humanity's role in this new order would be unique. They had proven themselves not just capable warriors, but adapters and innovators. Their NEXUS system was being expanded into a galaxy-wide network for sharing knowledge and coordinating responses to common threats. Their diplomatic corps, reformed in Santos' memory, would help mediate between species with radically different perspectives and needs. Ambassador Santos believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence, Chen said, standing before the Assembly's former throne. She died because some feared that possibility. But her death became the catalyst for creating exactly what she envisioned, just not in the way anyone expected. The formal signing of the Conclave Charter took place where Santos had fallen. Representatives from dozens of species, both long hidden and newly liberated, added their marks to a document that guaranteed rights and responsibilities for all spacefaring civilizations. The Assembly's former chambers would become the seat of this new organization, a reminder of how power must be shared, not hoarded. As the ceremony concluded, Martinez found herself looking out at the stars through the chamber's vast windows. The galaxy seemed bigger now, full of possibilities that the Assembly had tried to suppress. Humanity had proven itself not just through force of arms, but by showing a better way forward. She would have liked this, Chen said, joining her at the window. A galaxy where every species can reach for the stars in their own way. Martinez nodded. The war had been won not just by superior tactics or technology, but by offering hope to those who had been denied it. Humanity had entered the galactic stage as newcomers, faced attempted extinction, and emerged as architects of a new order. The Assembly had tried to correct humanity's rise. Instead, humanity had corrected the Assembly's fundamental error, the belief that power came from control rather than cooperation, from suppression rather than synergy. A new dawn was breaking across the galaxy, and this time, everyone would be free to forge their own path among the stars.